Good evening, and welcome to a quieter corner of history. Imagine yourself stepping through the towering arches of ancient stone. The air is dry, tinged with the scent of weathered limestone and olive oil. Around you, murmurs swell gently like waves, the sound of sandals brushing against gravel, vendors offering olives and dates, the low hum of Roman citizens settling into the day's entertainment. But this is not a festival. This is not a fair. This is the Colosseum. Tonight, we will not explore the roaring glory that's often romanticized in tales of gladiators and triumph. Instead, we walk slowly, softly, into the lesser-told stories, those of imbalance, of subtle cruelty, and of ordinary people swept into the extraordinary machinery of Roman spectacle. As we drift through each chamber of this story, from the quiet preparation of a gladiator's morning, to the hushed whispers of elite senatorial boxes, to the mysteries buried beneath the sands, allow your thoughts to settle like dusk over the Tiber. So, breathe in gently, and let us begin. As dawn stretched pale fingers across the Roman skyline, beneath the shadow of the Colosseum, life had already begun in motion. Not for spectators, not for senators, or slaves delivering trays of fruit to marble halls, but for those who would walk into the arena. Imagine waking on a stiff straw mattress in a dim, stone-walled chamber. The air is thick with the damp scent of earth and sweat. A narrow slit in the wall offers a sliver of sunlight. You are a gladiator in training, one of hundreds housed in the Ludus Magnus, the great school of combat, adjacent to the Colosseum itself. Some are volunteers, chasing fame or debt relief. Others are prisoners, condemned for rebellion, theft, or simply misfortune. The morning routine is grueling, yet methodical. Quietly, men rise and stretch limbs sore from yesterday's drills. There's no grand speech, no encouragement, only nods of recognition and the clink of iron as practice weapons are lifted. Breakfast is modest, coarse bread, dried fruit, and water. Nothing that would weigh down the body. Training begins in the open courtyard, under the careful eye of the lanista, a trainer often more feared than respected. Gladiators pair off. They rehearse movements with heavy wooden swords, the rudis, which thud softly against practice shields. No cheers meet these swings, only the occasional grunt or barked correction. Step left. Turn the shield. Don't look at the eyes. Look at the hips. There is no rivalry here. Every man knows that tomorrow, or the next day, they might be paired together, one to live, one to die. After drills, there is weapon inspection. Each man learns to wield different tools of war, depending on their assigned type: the heavily armoured secutor, the nimble retiarius with net and trident, the elusive Demachaerus who fights with a blade in each hand. But these roles were not assigned by skill alone. They were, often, chosen for spectacle. One might find himself newly trained, barely recovered from an infected wound, facing a rested opponent with a blade half again as long. Another might be ordered to fight blindfolded, or shackled, or against two foes instead of one. All, of course, for the entertainment of Rome. Lunch is brief. Then come more drills, interspersed with silent moments, mending armor, sharpening weapons, rubbing salves into sore limbs. At sunset, there is quiet, like the hush before a storm. Some pray, others sit in silence. A few laugh, telling old stories to forget the weight of tomorrow. And as the stars emerge above the tiled roofs of Rome, the amphitheatre looms like a slumbering beast, its belly quiet, but hungry still. Tomorrow some will enter it. Few will leave. Now, imagine you're seated not in the dusty training yard, but high above in the shaded tiers of the Colosseum itself. The crowd murmurs with a dull anticipation, a low tide of voices rising gently with the morning sun. You sit among citizens of all ranks, from toga-clad senators to barefoot labourers. Though the hierarchy of Rome is firmly preserved even in seating, all eyes fix on the same place, the arena floor. But what you are about to witness is not a fair contest. Despite the myths that cast gladiatorial combat as tests of skill, valor, or even honor, many matches were rigged from the very beginning. The imbalance was not always visible to the untrained eye. To the average Roman spectator, the match may have appeared competitive, yet beneath the illusion, the odds often leaned heavily and deliberately. The reasons were layered. One factor was politics. Victories in the arena were tools of spectacle, and spectacle served the ambitions of the elite. An emperor seeking favor might stage games where the crowd's favorite, often a celebrity gladiator, was granted a clear advantage. His opponent? Perhaps a lesser-trained Noxii, a criminal condemned to die, or a prisoner of war sent in merely to lose. Sometimes, the imbalance lay in equipment. A seasoned secutor, encased in metal and trained for years, might be pitted against a lightly armed fighter. While the styles of combat were designed to create interesting contrasts, speed versus strength, net versus sword, the outcomes often favored the better equipped, especially when one side had been selected with a wink and nod. Even the element of surprise could be stacked. Gladiators were sometimes misled about their opponents. One might train for weeks expecting a similarly armed adversary, only to discover moments before stepping into the sand that he would face a team of archers, or wild animals, or worse. And yet, these were not always accidents of poor planning. They were deliberate constructs. Matches were chosen to elicit emotion, awe, laughter, horror, or most effectively pity and relief. An unfair battle made for dramatic contrast. And if the underdog miraculously won, the roar of the crowd would shake the very stones. It wasn't always the mighty who were favored. Occasionally, the spectacle flipped. A famed gladiator might be humbled, forced to fight with a blunted weapon, or against multiple opponents. Not to punish, necessarily, but to thrill, to keep the public enthralled with the narrative. And always, beneath it all, was the spectre of the emperor's thumb. That single gesture, raised or turned, held the power to decide life or death. Even when a gladiator performed well, he might still be sacrificed to the mood of the crowd, or the whim of politics. Mercy was not always given to the deserving. Death was not always dealt to the guilty. In this way, the games were theatre, carefully choreographed, sometimes cruelly manipulated, and always staged for effect. The concept of fairness, at least as we understand it, was not part of the design. And yet, the Colosseum endured, stone by stone, match by match, because for the Romans, it wasn't justice they came to see. It was control. As we drift from the roaring crowd and dimming arena lights, let us descend now into the deeper mysteries buried beneath the amphitheatre itself, where forgotten bones and puzzling artifacts whisper of lives lost and stories left unfinished. Now let us descend, not through the stone steps of a stadium, but down into silence. Beneath the arena floor of the Colosseum, concealed from view for centuries, lies a labyrinth of forgotten corridors, damp chambers, and narrow shafts of filtered light. This substructure, known as the hypogeum, was the unseen machinery behind Rome's grandest spectacles, a place where lives began, or ended, just before the public ever saw them. The hypogeum was a marvel of ancient engineering. 2 stories deep, with over 30 elevators and trapdoors, it operated like a living stage. Wooden platforms creaked softly under the weight of cages and crates, rising smoothly into the arena above. Ropes groaned. Pulleys turned slowly. Hidden workers, often slaves, moved with careful efficiency, their tasks rehearsed not for art, but for timing. Precision was everything. The crowd above could never see the bloodless drama unfolding here. Some historians call it the backstage of the Colosseum, but it was more than that. It was a world apart, forgotten by most, even as they cheered above. Imagine standing in one of its long corridors. The floor beneath your feet is damp, the stone walls coated in a cool layer of condensation. A faint draught stirs the torchlight. Here, animals waited in darkness: leopards from Numidia, bears from the forests of Gaul, lions from distant Syria. Their roars echoed softly, oddly muffled by the thick walls, a kind of growl that never quite reached the surface. In adjacent cells, prisoners awaited their turn as well. Many would be thrown into venaciones, staged hunts where men faced beasts with little more than a spear. These executions were public and performative, designed not for justice, but to demonstrate the far reach of Roman power. Few survived them. What's left today are worn grooves in the stone, where the mechanisms once turned. Fragments of bone, bits of metalwork, rusted into obscurity. Archaeologists have discovered amphorae, tall clay jars tucked into corners, used perhaps for water, or oil, or something less savoury. They've uncovered graffiti etched into the walls. Names, prayers, curses. One reads simply, "Felix Fute, he was lucky." Some corridors open into slightly larger rooms, believed to be holding areas for gladiators about to emerge into the arena. Here, the air would have been tense, a mixture of oil, sweat, and silence. Even the bravest would feel the stone weight of anticipation. A few may have knelt in quiet prayer. Others sat still, eyes fixed on nothing at all. It's easy now to look upon the Hypogeum as a haunting relic, but for the Romans it was part of the grand machine. It didn't carry mystery then, only purpose. And yet, even in its calculated design, something unknowable remains. How many stories never rose through those trapdoors? How many names were erased by time, by fire, by the slow crumble of the centuries? The Hypogeum was sealed after the games ended. For centuries, it lay buried out of sight, out of mind. When it was unearthed, it had become something else entirely, a hushed space, cloaked in questions and echoing with forgotten breath. As we slowly ascend once more from the underworld of the Colosseum, let us turn our gaze toward those who watched, not with fear or anticipation, but with leisure. For our next moment in this quiet journey explores the very different world of Rome's elite, those whose days were gilded, whose hands stayed clean, even as others bled. Now, let us rise gently from the cool, dark corridors of the Hypogeum, up into the golden light of Roman privilege. While the Colosseum's lower chambers whispered of tension and toil, its upper tiers, particularly the shaded Maenianum Primum, hosted Rome's most powerful and pampered citizens. Draped in ivory-dyed tunics and reclining on cushioned seats brought in by slaves, the Roman elite arrived not merely to watch, but to be seen. Their day began very differently from that of the gladiators or workers. A wealthy Roman noble might wake beneath silk-canopied ceilings, attended by servants bearing trays of fresh figs, sweetened dates, and diluted wine. Their home's domus featured mosaic-tiled floors, courtyards perfumed with myrtle and rosemary, and fountains that trickled in endless rhythm. Voices were low, movements measured. To attend the games was a matter of fashion and politics. A senator might glide in with his retinue mid-morning, after a breakfast meeting or temple offering. His entrance would not go unnoticed. The seating was rigorously stratified. Senators, magistrates, priests, all carefully placed according to law and reputation. Higher seats were not necessarily worse. They simply belonged to lower classes. The highest tiers, in fact, were reserved for women, and the poor far from the action, exposed to sun and wind. In contrast, the elite watched in the shade, sipping from small cups of spiced wine, cooled by feathered fans, surrounded by hushed conversation. For them, the Colosseum was not a place of fear or excitement, it was a stage for empire itself. The games were evidence of Roman control, of exotic lands conquered, of enemies subdued. Yet there was more than detachment in their gaze. The powerful knew that spectacles were tools. A generous patron might sponsor games to win public favor, spending lavishly to outdo his peers. The emperor himself would sometimes appear, raising his hand slowly in greeting. A quiet thrill passed through the stands like a breeze over wheat. His presence alone held symbolic weight. An emperor visible was an emperor in command. And so, the elite played their part. They smiled, they applauded, they conversed. Some took notes, recording victories in wax tablets or composing verses about the afternoon's bloodshed. Others wagered discreetly, or composed letters to be sent by messengers before nightfall. It was a contrast difficult to ignore. Below, sand, sweat, blood. Above, perfume, silk, and soft laughter. Yet, for all their comfort, even the elite were not immune to Rome's underlying unease. Whispers of rebellion, grain shortages, or disease sometimes reached their ears. A poor showing in the arena, or worse, a scandal involving a gladiator could stir unrest. And so, while sipping wine and trading pleasantries, the upper echelons watched carefully. The arena was not just a spectacle, it was a barometer. In the evening they returned to homes lit by oil lamps, where baths were drawn and poetry was recited. Their dreams, if troubled, held little trace of the men who had fallen that day. And so, as linen was folded and sandals removed, the great Colosseum emptied slowly, its stones warm from the sun, its corridors silent once more. Now let us turn to a different kind of life, one not gilded or glorious, but ordinary. In our next passage, we'll visit the lives of those Romans who neither fought nor ruled, but lived quietly on the edges of empire, and who still, somehow found their place in the shadow of the Colosseum. Let us now step away from the columns and cushions into a quieter street. Here, the morning is slower, marked by the soft thump of bread dough against stone counters and the rhythmic creak of carts making their way through uneven alleyways. The scent of charcoal mingles with that of garlic and damp wool. This is the world of Rome's common citizens, the plebeians, the artisans, the traders, the labourers, those who watched the Colosseum not from shaded tiers, but from cracked benches beneath the open sky. Most of these Romans had little choice but to live with the games, not merely as entertainment, but as a presence that crept into their routines. On game days, the streets near the Amphitheatrum Flavium would crowd early. Markets bustled with spectators purchasing figs, sausages, or honeyed nuts. Children ran underfoot, weaving through legs, hoping for glimpses of gladiators or beasts in their cages. It was both spectacle and disruption. Many attended the games not out of bloodlust, but because it was free. Entry was covered by the state or by wealthy patrons. For the working poor, this was one of the few luxuries within reach, a day to sit, to watch, to feel part of something grand. Still, not all were swept up in awe. Bakers needed to bake. Cobblers continued to stitch soles. Not everyone could afford to stop working. A fishmonger might complain about the lack of customers, while a laundress, hauling linens past the arena walls, muttered about the noise. For some, the Colosseum was a marvel. For others, a nuisance. Life outside the arena was built around small routines. Water was drawn from public fountains, shared meals prepared in communal kitchens. The average Roman apartment and insula was modest at best, sometimes precariously built, with wooden staircases and walls that swayed with the wind. Fire was a constant threat. So was cold in the winter and heat in the summer. Privacy was rare, yet in this world, people found ways to celebrate. They gathered in taverns to drink watered wine and talk politics. They worshipped household gods in tiny shrines, lit lamps at dusk, and exchanged gossip across windows and balconies. Children played with clay figurines. Housewives bartered for figs or coriander. Older men told the same stories, again and again. On the evening of a game, stories travelled quickly. Who had won? Was there a miracle match? Did someone earn their freedom with a final blow? These tales echoed through the taverns and stairwells, embroidered slightly with each retelling. Some found work from the games, too. Vendors sold treats outside the gates. Artisans made trinkets, small wooden carvings of gladiators, or clay oil lamps etched with images of lions and swords. Even painters found commission, creating murals or frescoes in the homes of those who could afford them, sometimes depicting scenes from famous matches. And beneath it all, a quiet truth. Most Romans lived with little agency. They watched, they whispered, they endured. The Colosseum for them was not a monument of glory. It was part of the scenery, towering and ever-present, but distant in its scale. For while a select few wielded the power of life and death, most simply carried on boiling lentils, mending cloaks, sweeping stone steps. Their history is not one of triumph or spectacle, but of quiet resilience, of survival. And so, as the crowds trickled home and torches burned low in the city's alleyways, the ordinary Romans closed their shutters, laid their heads on worn blankets, and drifted off, just as we do now, into another part of the tale. In the next segment, we shall reflect on those who were brought from beyond Rome's borders, foreigners, captives, and strangers thrust into the games and into history, without ever choosing it. Let us now follow the Roman roads outward, far from the heart of the empire, beyond its marble forums and tiled villas, across the sun-bleached provinces and shadowed forests. Along these roads, thousands were brought in chains, in silence, or in resignation. Foreigners and captives swept into the imperial tide. Many of these individuals would find themselves, in time, within the walls of the Colosseum. They came from distant lands: Gaul, with its misty woods and broad rivers; Thrace, mountainous and wild; Numidia, dry and windswept; even from Parthia, across the stretching sands where the stars glimmered over desert towns. Rome's wars reached far, and with each victory the empire claimed not only territory, but people. Some of those taken became household slaves, others manual labourers or servants in noble estates, but many particularly The young, the strong, or those of defiant spirit were sent to the games. They were labelled Noxii criminals, enemies of the state, or simply undesirables. This term was applied broadly. One might be a rebel, another a captured soldier, and yet another a local leader who had refused to bend the knee. There was no trial, only classification. These individuals were not trained as gladiators. They were not afforded armor or instruction or even the hope of survival. Most were sent into venationes, those infamous displays where wild animals, lions, bears, boars were loosed upon unarmed men. Others were grouped and made to fight one another, sometimes with sticks, sometimes with dull blades, purely for the grim delight of the crowd. It is difficult to know their names. Rome did not record them. The sands swallowed their stories. Yet evidence of their presence lingers. Stone reliefs depict unarmored figures, crouching as beasts approach. Inscriptions mention barbarians felled in the arena. Archaeological traces, non-Roman burial customs, foreign trinkets hint at lives lived far from the Tiber. Some captives learned Latin, some converted to Roman religion, or served Roman households before being sent to die. Their identity, already fragmented, was often further erased. They became props in a political message. This is what happens to those who resist. But there were exceptions rare, flickering moments where a captive survived the games and was spared. Occasionally the crowd would be so moved or amused that the emperor, with a subtle wave, would grant mercy. These survivors were sometimes given the rudis, the wooden sword symbolizing freedom, and with it, a chance, however, slim at life beyond the walls. Still, most were not so fortunate. Their legacy lies not in glory or triumph, but in quiet testament to the scale of Rome's ambition. The Colosseum was not merely a theatre of sport. It was a declaration, a monument to control, to expansion, and to the power to erase as well as to elevate. So we remember them now not with fanfare or triumph, but with the silent reverence that history often withholds. They did not choose the arena, but they walked its sands nonetheless. As we turn from the empire's outer edges, let us return to the structure itself, not its stones or sands, but what it meant to be there. In our next segment, we'll gently walk through the rituals of spectacle, the choreography of a Roman game day, and the rhythms that brought tens of thousands together in collective breath. Imagine now the soft light of early morning spreading across the rooftops of Rome, a hush before the ritual begins. The day of the games was not chaos, it was ceremony, a carefully woven sequence of events shaped by tradition, law, and performance. The Colosseum did not simply open its gates and let the crowd pour in. It invited the city to participate in a day of shared rhythm, a civic ballet of presence, posture, and applause. It began before dawn. Workers arrived early, brushing sand across the arena floor to conceal the traces of the previous day. The seats, many made of stone, some of marble, were swept clean, olive oil lamps extinguished, torches replaced. Beneath the floor, in the hypogeum, cages creaked open and gates were tested, the hidden stage prepared once again for its unseen performance. Spectators from all walks of life assembled steadily. Entry was free, but access was regulated. Wooden tickets, etched with section numbers, were distributed in advance. The crowd entered by numbered arches, guided by ushers known as turmae. It was a model of efficiency, thousands of people seated in less than an hour, without chaos. At the top levels, vendors called out softly, offering cups of water, dried fruit, or bean porridge. A few early murmurs rose and fell, like the breeze. Then, the pompa, this ceremonial procession, marked the true beginning. It was no less theatrical than the games themselves. The editor of the games, perhaps a magistrate, or even the emperor, led the parade. He would be dressed in the toga picta, dyed purple and embroidered with gold, the traditional garb of triumph. Behind him walked musicians, dancers, priests, and those to be honored or sacrificed. Gladiators followed, sometimes silent, sometimes greeted with chants from the crowd. They were symbols of controlled strength, the living embodiment of discipline and death. Occasionally, wild animals were paraded too, their handlers guiding them with firm hands and hushed commands. This parade wound slowly through the arena before dispersing. Then came the Prelucio, an opening act. Mock battles, fencing displays, perhaps a comic skit or a small beast hunt, designed to warm the crowd and test the arena floor. By midday, the true contests began. The order of events followed a predictable arc. Morning featured the venaciones, the animal hunts. These were elaborate and sometimes cruel, but always dramatic. Lions sprang from hidden cages. Ostriches ran awkward laps before being caught. Occasionally, elephants were brought in, guided with surprising gentleness despite their scale. Each event was designed not only to entertain, but to remind the people of Rome's reach. These creatures had been brought from the far edges of the world, and now bowed before Roman spectacle. After a brief pause, the afternoon brought executions. This was often the darkest part of the day, though framed as justice rather than cruelty. Criminals, or those labelled as such, were made to fight animals or one another. Some were burned or buried alive. These events were attended with less fanfare, though few left their seats. Then, as the shadows lengthened, came the gladiatorial combats, the main event. These were not wild brawls, but structured encounters. Opponents were introduced with a flourish. Their names, origins, and past victories were announced. The crowd leaned forward, invested, curious. They chanted, they placed bets. Some had favourite fighters, followed like modern celebrities. A strong showing could bring admiration, even love. A weak one could mean scorn or death. The fights were intense, but not always fatal. A skilled gladiator could disarm or subdue his opponent without killing. When a clear winner emerged, the defeated would raise a finger, a plea for mercy. The crowd responded with shouts, gestures, and opinions. Ultimately, the editor, swayed by mood, politics, or personal preference, rendered judgment. Thumbs turned. The games would continue through the afternoon, sometimes into early evening. As the light softened and the air cooled, spectators gradually trickled away. Their day complete, their appetite for spectacle sated. But the rituals did not end with applause. Workers returned once more, sweeping the sand, tending to the animals, preparing the bodies. Gladiators were led back to their lodgings silent, bruised, perhaps victorious. And the Colosseum exhaled. Its rituals paused, but never ceased. For even in stillness, it was preparing, always preparing, for the next day's breath. And now, as our footsteps echo lightly across these ancient rhythms, we draw closer to our final passage, a reflection on the decline of the games and the quieting of Rome's great arena. As every sun must set, so too did the games begin their long twilight. In its prime, the Colosseum rang with cheers, iron, and orchestration. But time patient, impartial, touched even this monument of might. Not in a single moment, but as a quiet, creeping fade, a kind of soft erosion that began, as it so often does, at the edges. By the 4th century CE, the empire had begun to falter, the economy strained, external threats pressed harder along the borders, political power shifted like dry leaves in wind. And within Rome, something else stirred, a quiet, spiritual revolution. Christianity, once persecuted, now gained imperial favour, and with it came a different set of values: mercy over spectacle, humility over grandeur. The old gods' temples emptied, the theatres fell quiet, and the games slowly lost their place. But they did not vanish overnight. The last gladiatorial contest in the Colosseum is believed to have taken place in 404 CE. According to one account, a Christian monk named Telemachus stepped into the arena to protest the violence. The crowd turned on him. He was killed, but the emperor, Honorius, was said to have been moved. He soon banned gladiatorial combat. Animal hunts continued for a time. They lingered like the echo of an old song, less frequent, less elaborate. The funding dried up. The crowds thinned. Eventually, even the exotic beasts stopped arriving. Roman roads, once arteries of power, carried fewer trophies. As the centuries turned, nature reclaimed its share. Earthquakes cracked the foundations. Lightning struck its upper arches. Weeds rooted between the stones. The Colosseum no longer hosted emperors or echoed with applause. It became a quarry. Its marble was harvested for churches, its bronze clamps pried away for reuse. Birds nested in its arches. The air within grew still. And yet, it endured. For a time, people lived inside its squatters. Monks, even a small chapel, nestled into a forgotten corridor. Then, in the Renaissance, it became an object of study and sketch. A ruin, yes, but a beautiful one. Grand in silence, regal in decay. The modern visitor walks paths where chariots once rolled. They run fingers along columns worn by centuries. They pause in the upper tiers and imagine just briefly the roar that once rose from the stones. But what remains most vividly is not sound, nor spectacle, nor even structure. It is the stillness. The Colosseum, once so loud, now rests in hushed dignity. Its walls hold stories without shouting them. Its shadows fall gently across centuries. It has become, in its silence, something truer than it ever was in noise. It reminds us that all empires fade. That time softens even the sharpest edges. That grandeur, once gone, becomes memory. And now, as we prepare to leave this ancient place behind, let us close our eyes and linger just a moment longer with the final thoughts that this journey brings. And so, dear listener, we find ourselves at the edge of the arena once more, though now the crowds are gone, the torches cold, the sand undisturbed. The sun has long since set behind the crumbling arches, and in its place only shadow and stillness. The Colosseum stands not as a monument to strength, nor simply to violence, but to impermanence, a mirror reflecting both the power and fragility of empire. Within its walls once surged triumph and terror, cheers and cries, ambition and fear. And yet, what remains now are softened stones, worn inscriptions, and the occasional flutter of wings in the high galleries. We have walked tonight through the corridors of history, from the quiet awakening of a gladiator, to the silken seats of senators, to the groaning elevators beneath the earth. We've met prisoners without names, tradesmen without comfort, and emperors who ruled not just with laws, but with games. Together, they formed the pulse of ancient Rome, a rhythm of lives both exalted and expendable. But now that pulse is still, and perhaps that is the gentle wisdom that remains, that what once thrilled now lulls, that what once roared now rests. In this transformation, the Colosseum offers a strange comfort. Even the grandest engines of cruelty lose their edge. Even the noisiest arenas fall silent. So breathe, slowly, as the dust settles once more. Know that the world you inhabit now, for all its troubles, is quieter than the one we've just visited, that your bed is softer than straw, your evening not spent in fear of the emperor's thumb. Let that thought wrap around you like a cloak. Let it draw you down, gently, gently, into sleep. Good night, traveller, and may your dreams be soft, even when drawn from stone.